Bienvenidos, worldwide fans of the planet's hottest entertainment with an edge. I'm Enfuego here, and I welcome you to my namesake program, Enfuegotainment. That's right, and just call me Fuego for short. And this is another Music Monday review, but it's actually kind of a double review in the fact that just last week, we finally, almost 2 years later, had the release of the remake of Valley Girl. Jessica Rothe was a chick that I had really dug in the two Happy Death Day films, and so I was like, okay, based on that and the fact that I do like musicals even though the trailers look super cheese, I did remember enjoying the original Valley Girl, but it had been probably at least 10, maybe 15 years since I'd seen it. We're talking, not quite half my lifetime, but, still, as a dude in his 30s, it's not a film that I had revisited countless times, like, Fast Times at Ridgemont High, which came out a year before, or anything of that nature, various sex comedies of the 80s and even the 90s and so on and so forth. So yeah, we finally had this film released, and originally it was shelved because of the fact that Logan Paul, who is in this movie for God's sake, he plays Mickey, you're so fine, you blow my mind. That guy's a douche, and I understand why they shelved it with all the, the horrible red tape and bad PR that he was making at the time when this film was initially going to be released, because they filmed it all the way back in 2017. Yeah, this has been sitting around for a while. But so essentially what I did was I watched the new film, which is unlike the original, which was just full-on like R-rated, like teen sex, like comedy dramedy, I guess you would say. This new one is PG-13, and it's full-on musical, so there's dance numbers and there's popular 80s songs throughout and stuff like that. So they definitely, as opposed to a straight remake, they tried to do something different, which I appreciate. And so I watched the new one, and then I immediately turned around and I watched the old one for the first time, and as I said, an immense amount of years. And so this will be a fun little counterbalance, counter and contrast. But right off the bat, I have to say, I did not hate this new version of Valley Girl. It's essentially, in a lot of ways, like the original version of Hairspray versus when they made the Hairspray musical movie. That's the best way that you could describe it. I enjoyed that Hairspray musical movie, the one with John Travolta and, all-star cast of all kinds of peeps. And I also like where they take songs from an era or a band and try to weave it into a narrative, and that's exactly what they did with this. Didn't always work, but I mean, a controversial film that I actually really enjoyed, where I felt that it did work, and I know a lot of people hated on it, was Across the Universe, where they took Beatles songs and they weaved it into the narrative, and it helped propel the story forward. And that's pretty much what we get with this. So yes, right off the bat, it's very interesting the way that they frame this. And that's another thing where I will give brownie points to this film, is that it's essentially starting out with this girl, and she's all pissed off at this club, calls a ride, turns out it's her mom, but she has a cool mom played by Alicia Silverstone, and I'll get into some issues with that here in a moment, but just thinking of Cher being a mom is crazy, although I just saw her recently in The Lodge in a small supporting role, and she was good in that, So, she takes her daughter home, and she's like, what happened? Why are you so upset? And she's like, yeah, me and so-and-so, we broke up, and he's got issues with me going to Japan after graduation, and, so on and so forth. So, not immensely important in this regard. So, Alicia Silverstone, though, starts saying, oh, well, I have a story to tell you, kid, and it's about heartbreak and so on and so forth, and she starts telling her about her childhood back in the 80s. Okay, 1983 to be specific, so at least the year that this is taking place is the same year that the original film was released and taking place, and so there you have it for continuity. Where we don't have continuity is the fact that we're presumably seeing a senior in high school who is about to graduate and wants to go off to design school and all this other stuff, and that is the young version of Alicia Silverstone's character, who is played by none other than Tree, Jessica Rothe, as I said, from Happy Death Day. Thing is, though, Alicia Silverstone's only 43. And if we're thinking 27 years back from 43, I mean, hell, she was even, if they filmed this 2 years ago, Alicia Silverstone was only like 39, 40-ish, something like that, probably. So they weren't really very kind to her in this one, having her play somebody who you know, is much older than she actually was. I don't know what that says, you know, from the producers. And she actually is uncredited in this. And I would imagine it's because of the fact that she is, despite still looking very good, supposed to be significantly younger. But the whole movie, it intersperses her back and forth with the flashbacks to her as her younger self with her friends in 1983, and then it keeps cutting back to her and her daughter, and they're sitting there sharing a tub of ice cream, they're drinking coffee, they're having this bonding experience, which I actually really enjoyed. The chemistry between the two of them is solid, and it gave a new spin to this story that I was not expecting, so props to them for that. And yeah, I mean, it's pretty cheese, you know, especially the fact that, okay, it's punk rocker kid and, you know, Valley Girl. Everybody knows that, although Nick Cage's character was more of like a new wave punk kind of guy as opposed to like the sort of like hardcore that you would think. Punks in LA in the early 80s were definitely, I mean, in 1983, even My Beloved Bad Religion were like recording Into the Unknown, which was, they went from their hardcore roots in 79, 80 to, you know, being much more new wavy art-centric and, you know, stuff like that. So that's more of the type of punk that, you know, he is, especially from attire to hairstyle and all this other stuff. But yeah, this punk is, in this new version, is more of like what we like envision punks to be, with, you know, tattoos and earring and the spiked bracelets and, you know, all this other stuff. So he is more like your proto-punk, you know, and his two buddies kind of are too. I guess the drummer with the faked, you know, spikes and stuff on his hair, he's relatively forgettable and nowhere near as endearing as Nick Cage's friend Fred, I believe was his name in the original movie. That kid is throwaway in this new one. However, the other friend, who is the bass player in the band and the sidekick, oh, and that's another change, is the fact that he's not just a music, you know, punk aficionado and enthusiast. He's actually in a band in this new version of the film. So he sings and he plays guitar, and he's got a band with the aforementioned dude with the Liberty Spikes, and then he's got this little, you know, lesbian friend of his who is, she's been in tons of stuff, man. I can't even rattle off her IMDb, but she's a noteworthy name, and you will totally recognize her. So, yeah, she's his bass player, best friend, and kind of more like his confidant and his moral barometer. And when you know that this is probably going to follow a lot of the same beats of the first film, the Romeo and Juliet aspect, the fact that, okay, two kids from opposite sides of the tracks or the hill in this particular point, you know, love can conquer, and opposites attract in that regard. But yeah, I mean, she, his friend who's in the band, she is much more, I guess, the real person that he comes to with issues in this in comparison. And so, yeah, the dance numbers, as I mentioned, they're over the top, they're kind of cheese, and I mean, it starts out with songs that you would expect, you know, like we got the Beats, you know, the Go-Go's, and then, you know, when we jump to the other side of the hill and we've got the punk kid, you know, they're singing, you know, I don't give a damn about my bad reputation, so you got some Joan Jett covering going down there from the Runaways. And yeah, I mean, but once it kind of gets into its groove, I must say, it's charming, you know, it's fun. I did not hate it. It's a solid 3 out of 5 Fuego Fireballs film, and the cast is, you know, the fact that Logan Paul got so much terrible press for being in this movie, he, like I said, is he's a turd merchant, and I can't stand the guy, but the fact that he plays the douchey boyfriend in this to perfection, I was just thinking to myself as I watched it, I was like, damn, homeboy doesn't even have to act in this, he just is that. You know, and even the way he asks our lead to prom, to, you know, Jessica's character, you know, he's a tennis player, and they have, hey, Mickey, you're so fun, like cheerleader rally for him going into this tennis championship, and he asks her to prom by having all of his buddies pull their pants down, and they have prom written on their respective asses. And of course, Roth's character is like, yeah, I just got asked to prom by a bunch of assholes. And so, stuff like that, and also the principal saying, please, at prom this year, don't spike the punch, I got a DUI last year. I mean, there is some sharp writing in this film. There is some fun. And, I mean, Mandy Moore does all of the choreography for this, so props to her for just finding new ways to just find work within the industry, you know. She started out as one of those little Pop-Tarts, and then she segued more into acting. Saved is one of my favorite performances from her, and I know everyone adores her on This Is Us, so that's something to keep in mind. But after breaking from the Ryan Adams guy, who she had this horribly abusive marriage with, and trying to do more folk music and more art-centric stuff, I've always liked her. And I'm happy to see that she was able to be a part of this. The choreography is nothing that's going to blow your mind, but it's still, the movie is very slickly put together. It's well produced, it's well shot, and our two leads have some legitimate charm to them. They do. And, Jessica's performance as Tree in Happy Death Day to You, the sequel specifically, with stuff with her deceased mother, she has a couple dramatic bits in that film that impressed the hell out of me. And since this movie was actually filmed before that Happy Death Day sequel, I gotta say that she was already putting on display in some of those instances of relational conflict, those skills that she has, and that I think she's gonna be a big talent in the industry as time continues to go on and she finds new roles and stuff like this. What else? Judy Greer, I forget the name of the other actor who's the father, but those two have some amusing moments. There's a bit where Jessica's character is, she's very coyly asking her mother some advice about breaking up with Mickey, the douchebag boyfriend played by Logan Paul. And it's after she's met the edgy punk at the party and gone and spent the whole night out with him, going down the strip and, going over into Hollywood and just daring to venture and everything, which is amusing because it's a scene that they totally recreate almost beat for beat from the original film, for better or for worse, as some people may take exception to that and may think, no, just completely don't have those nods, do everything, more different and unique, like with the framing device that I mentioned. But yeah, she's asking Judy Greer, her mother, about, so what do you do when you have this piece and you want to fit it and, it just doesn't seem to fit and blah, blah, blah. And her mom thinks she's talking about anal. And she's like, well, there's a time and a place. And she starts giving her this advice and she's like, oh, Mom, gross. And so, stuff like that. And, to the lesbian bass player in our main love interest band, she is talking fondly at one point about this girl, Marie, that she used to date. And she's like, oh, you mean the girl who went off to rehab? And so that's another thing. And the dude steals a mask from this guy who was dressed up as Reagan at the party, which is early in the film. And he's like, looks like you lost the war on drugs, Mr. President. So, there is some sharp writing. And but you do kind of know the extent of all of the beats, especially if you've seen the original film. But it had some nice charm to it. I really have to admit that it did. And the way that they kind of circle things back, and Alicia Silverstone at the end, as she's trying to give her daughter some advice without spoiling some things, she's like, as she's talking to her daughter about this boyfriend that, her daughter is broken up with and that we don't know what's going to happen. She's like, first loves don't always last, but they change everything, and that's definitely something important to mention, is the fact that this film did have some heart that I was legitimately impressed by. And yes, it was not the absolute just shit show that I was anticipating, especially with the delays and all of this other stuff. So yeah, now moving on to revisiting the original film was very interesting because, as I said, I did not really remember it very well at all. Not one that I had gone back to countless times like various others from the 80s that are endeared to me, especially of this romantic variety. Later on you had stuff like Say Anything, or even goofier stuff like Better Off Dead. And yes, I know I just railed off two Cusack movies, but nonetheless, the '83 film stars in his first ever leading role none other than Nicholas Coppola, as he was credited in the previous year's Fast Times at Ridgemont High, which I would imagine this film was most definitely trying to jump hot on the heels of that film, although it only came out like 8 months later, so I'm not sure how quick that turnover could have been, but maybe they fast-tracked this movie, when they saw the success of that one, and it had been in development for a while, because there was that Zappa song called Valley Girl, and he even tried to get them to stop making this movie. Initially, he tried to say it was like damaging his trademark or something. I don't know. But in any event, the movie did end up getting made, and Nicholas Coppola became Nicolas Cage. He was trying to distance himself at least a little bit from that prestigious family he has the association with. And you've got a scream queen in and of her own right, despite the fact that she appeared, I think, a year or two later in Real Genius with Val Kilmer. Deborah Foreman, I think her name is. Yeah, she's known more so to me for stuff like April Fool's Day, and she was in Waxwork, and I think she was even in that Grizzly sequel that they were trying to finish up recently or something. In any event, yeah, so this is R-rated in comparison, and you find out very quickly it's most definitely R-rated. There's boobs, there's F-bombs, and yet it's got such... It's so authentic of the era in comparison with, I mean, yes, this new one most definitely felt like the equivalent of a cover song, but at least a cover song where they were trying to do something a little bit different with it, which is what the best cover songs do. But in a lot of ways, there's never going to be a substitute for the original film. The original Valley Girl is significantly superior, and, you know, I mean, being the first to come around, it definitely, you know, set the groundwork. But I mean, really, it's the soundtrack for me more so than anything, because the performances in this film, I actually think in some ways, aside from the leads, it's tough. It's all the supporting players in this, man, they are very one note, and it's kind of goofy, and there's just a different form of cheese in the remake. This 83 version is very much of its era, especially with a lot of the vernacular and, you know, and yet that's what's so endearing about, you know, everything being radical and bitchin' and saying like every, you know, couple minutes or whatever. But it's the soundtrack that I think endears it more so than anything to me, because the fashion, this isn't when 80s fashion was really like coming into its own in the mid to late 80s. This was 83, you know, and so they're still kind of trying to find its identity. It's the music in this more so than anything else. I mean, Men at Work, Psychedelic Furs, you've got that awesome song A Million Miles Away that's used a few times in the film, and then also the, you know, I Melt With You, I think it's called, Modern English, man. And it's funny because in the remake they use that song as a big plot crux, you know, and they actually factor it into the story. Whereas in this, it's just the iconic song that was used in the romantic montage halfway through, and then it's also our end credits. And so those are big things to keep in mind, but I must admit, I'd forgotten about the subplot of the cougar mom of one of our lead lady's friends, so that was interesting. I forgot how much Deborah Foreman looks like Pat Benatar in this movie. It's pretty uncanny. And I'd also forgot the fact that she has actual caring, compassionate, post-hippie, endearing parents. Unlike in our remake, where parents are very against her dating the bad boy, and they're real judgmental pricks about it. They really are, and that's in the remake. In the original one, the father is actually more... He's got this Sonny Bono kind of thing going on, but you know, they own this health food like restaurant slash store, and she thinks it's such a drag. I must admit, our lead lady in this original one, Deborah Foreman's character, I don't like her as much as Jessica Rothe in the role. I don't. This girl in the original is a little derpier and a little bit like, I don't know what I want, you know, and yet it makes more sense in the remake as to the motivations of the character. You can tell that she cares a lot more about the bad boy halfway through, and that she dumps, well, without getting into too many spoilers about the differentiation, I think Jessica Rothe's performance, she goes back with the other guy for more understandable reasons, as opposed to in the 83 version where she's just kind of like, I don't know what I want, I'm just going to yield to the pressure of my friends being judgmental. And her friends are pretty, I mean, the friends are relatively annoying in both films, but they are a lot hoier, I should say, especially with a lot of their raunch discussion about sex and various other things in the 83 version of this film. So I was kind of taken aback just seeing how bold some of that dialogue was from a few of these, and yet we do still see a lot of the same plot beats and stuff with, you know, a friend of hers liking her ex that she's initially dumped at the beginning of the movie, and so there are the correlations, okay, but I don't know if I would definitely say it's like more like the more dark aspects of the 83 version add as much depth as I had initially thought. And really the fun fluff that we have at times in the musical version, this remake, it's it's not as blasphemous as I expected either. Back to that Hairspray comparison, you know, I really enjoy both the non-musical version of it and the remake where they implemented all the songs from the Broadway show. So yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think I hit the predominance of all of my beats here. And so, yep, I got the beats, everybody. But yeah, I mean, don't shun off the Valley Girl remake just because of the fact that you hold the original in such sanctity. You might actually find an interesting perspective from it. Yes, it's more so than anything, it's meant for a much younger, newer audience who probably doesn't remember, has never seen the OG film, but there are merits to this 2020 version. You even get a Deborah Foreman cameo in the new version of it that just came out, so that kind of charmed me. I even was looking for a second, I'm like, is that her? Is that her? Yeah, it's totally her. And the uncredited Alicia Silverstone playing much older than her actual age. You know, she brings something in that new film that I was impressed by, and I think that's where fans of the original could look back from her perspective and find something new to enjoy about the 2020 version of it. So I've been Jaime En Fuego. Y'all can find more on all social media sectors like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, here on YouTube, just like you see below. On my personal channel here, that's where I cover primarily spooktacular stuff, or excuse me, the non-spooktacular. That's coming in a moment, but I can do weird musical shizzle like this, or I can do, you know, comedies, and I can do, you know, more or less anything that I would like, whether it's geeking out on Star Wars stuff, art house, indie, crime thriller, whatever's. I mean, sky is pretty much the limit, with the exception of when I'm over on the main channel, which is youtube.com/The Horror Show channel, like you see below. And hooray for technical difficulties, that is on my bad. But yeah, Horror Show channel, obviously, that's where myself, Marsha Parker, Cecil Laird, Susie von Slotta, Robert Duell, the conglomerate of us get together and we discuss all things spooktacular, and it's everything from trailer reactions to unboxings, reviews of everything under the sun spooktacular, and yeah, it is where I implore you to go and check out. But yeah, aside from that, I extend a grande gracias once more, and until the Reel of Ka comes around once more, hasta luego, Cinemigos, constant readers and viewers alike. Say thank you for tuning in. Please like, share, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'm hopeful that we get to share more of this film palaver sooner rather than later. And until then, stay indoors and watch and read more. Do it now.